Hello, good morning, everybody. Happy Friday. This is Shaylin Alaman with the Arizona College Access Network, and today I have Julie Signs with us. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. You are all on mute, but if you have any questions or comments throughout the webinar, please type them in the Q&A box. Julie will stop periodically and we can answer any questions that you might have. I also will be recording this webinar and you will get a copy of that as well as the slide deck after. I think that's it. So I'll hand it on over to you, Julie.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shaylin. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining the webinar today. So today's webinar topic is after the FAFSA. So it's all about verification and financial aid awards. And as Shaylin mentioned, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and then I will definitely pause through and answer those questions as we run through the slides. So on the agenda today, we're going to talk about analyzing the confirmation page, which is part of the FAFSA. We'll also talk about what is the student aid report. Within the student aid report, we'll also touch base on FAFSA corrections and updates. And then we'll talk about verification. So we'll talk about what verification is, how it works, the types of information that's requested from verification. We'll also touch base on various tax transcripts and also verification items that some students may need to provide, such as non-filing and statements of income. And then lastly, we'll talk about award letters and type of financial aid. So we'll go in depth on the different types of student loans that students may be awarded, the Pell Grant. We'll talk about the updated Pell Award amount for this year. And then we'll also touch base on federal work study and scholarships. And then lastly, we'll go over resources. We have quite a few resources available for this webinar. So we'll be emailing all of the handouts and resources in this slide deck as well post-webinar. But again, if you have any questions or concerns, feel free to put them in the chat, and that way we can address them as we go through the webinar today. So for those of you who are familiar with the FAFSA application, on the left-hand side, I have put a screenshot of the confirmation page that was most commonly seen in the FAFSA application. So you probably saw it for your class of 2021 seniors, what it looked like. And then on the right-hand side, this is a screenshot for the class of 2022. So you can see the FAFSA, the U.S. Department of Education, has changed the look of it a little bit. It's just a little more cleaner. It's less wordy. It's more, consolidated and simplified. So when you see the confirmation page this year compared to last year, it's going to look a little different, but it's going to have the same information on it. So the confirmation page is basically once a student submits their FAFSA, they sign it, hit submit. This is the page that comes up. So on the right-hand side, you'll see that it will list all of the schools that the student included on their FAFSA. It will have the information on the schools, such as their graduation rate, retention rate, transfer rate. And then it will also have a section on it as well, as far as estimated amounts that the student may be eligible for. The estimated amounts, again, are just estimates. These are not exact, but it gives the student a good idea as to what they may be eligible for in the various types of financial aid. So the thing we do want to mention is that for students, please reiterate to them that the confirmation page is not their official award letter. And we'll go into more detail as far as what the award letter is. However, the confirmation page is just that. It just confirms that the student has successfully submitted their FAFSA application. So we definitely recommend that the student can either print it out, they can screenshot it, save it, and that way they know that the FAFSA has been submitted. The other thing we just want to also reiterate is that students will receive an award letter from the schools listed on their FAFSA. So they can include up to 10 schools on the FAFSA at a time. But keep in mind, in order to get an award letter, which is basically these are the awards you're eligible for at this institution to attend here, they also have to submit a college application and be accepted. So FAFSA is a critical step in this process, but it's not the only step. Students still need to apply for admissions, and then the FAFSA and the admissions application go hand in hand. So to calculate the types of financial aid that is in an award letter, there's different factors that come into play. So it really depends on the overall cost of attendance for that school. So the award letter may be different from a community college compared to a state university because the community college has a lesser attendance cost. It also depends on the grade levels. So is a student coming in as a freshman, sophomore, junior, senior? Course load as well. Is a student coming in full-time? Are they going to take 12 credits, which is considered full-time? Or are they only taking 2 classes as a part-time student? That would impact the award letter as well because the tuition would be a lesser amount. The other item would be housing plans. So is a student living on campus, off campus, or with parents? If they're living on campus, they have to account for room and board. If they're living off campus, they want to account for living expenses for that student. And then lastly, also, GPA and test scores are not considered for federal aid. However, they are considered for merit-based aid. And we'll talk more in depth about those further along in the presentation. So again, just wanted to mention that the admissions application is a really important step, same as a FAFSA application. So these are 2 separate applications. We find that a lot of students get confused thinking that, oh, I submitted the FAFSA and I put the name of the school that I want the FAFSA to go to, so that counts as my admissions application. We want students to know that these are 2 separate applications that really work hand in hand together. So they must submit a FAFSA application. Like I mentioned, they can include 10 schools at a time on the FAFSA. And then they also must submit an admissions application to each of those schools that they want to apply for admissions for. So again, FAFSA application plus admissions application, if the student gets into that institution, then it'll produce an award letter for them. All right, so what is a student aid report? So on the left-hand side, I've provided a snapshot so you can see what the upcoming 2022-2023 student aid report is going to look like. And basically what it is once a student completes a FAFSA, they will get an email, usually about 24 to 48 hours. Sometimes it can take up to 72 hours, depending on when the student submits the FAFSA. And it basically lets them know your student aid report is available. The student aid report can also be mailed to the student, and the student can also access the student aid report online. So in that email that the student receives, it will say, here's a link to access your student aid report. And basically what it is it's just a summary of all the information that they provided on their FAFSA. So it's a summary of all the questions that the student asked, the student answered, and all of the responses that they provided. So this is a way so the students can ensure that all of their information is correct. If there's any missing information, then the student should complete the missing information as soon as possible. Or if the student has any incorrect information, then they would want to go ahead and update that.
And on the next slide, we'll talk more in depth about what can and can't be updated. If the student looks over the student aid report and finds that everything's correct on there aren't any issues, then they would go ahead and just leave that alone. They don't need to process any changes, and that way they can just keep that student aid report on file. The student aid report is also called a SAR. So it's basically SAR, stands for student aid report. So you may hear it called either one, but again, it's basically just a summary of all the students' information. And as you can see in the screenshot in the upper left-hand corner, if they did need to make corrections, it would be the bottom one that says correction history. All right, so let's go in more depth as far as what corrections can be made. So again, this is that screenshot I was referring to. So if they do need to make corrections, they would just click on corrections history, and that way they can go ahead and make corrections and click on start corrections. So these are the items that the student could make if they need to make corrections. So these are easy correctable items that they can make online. We typically prefer that students make the corrections online. That way it's processed quicker through the U.S. Department of Education. However, they will also receive that student aid report in the mail, which is a paper form, and they can update the corrections by paper as well. It just takes a little longer for it to update, usually about 2 to 3 weeks. So if they can make the corrections online, I would say advise them to do that as opposed to the paper version. So these items can easily be corrected. So if they need to update their mailing address, they can easily go online, make the corrections, update their mailing address. If they need to update their email address, they can definitely do that, or any other contact information, maybe a phone number or cell phone number they want to update. The other thing that they can do is add or remove schools. So as mentioned, they can add up to 10 colleges or universities at a time. So if they want to add some more schools on there, they definitely can. Or if they want to remove some schools and substitute them out for others, this would be the place to do it here. All right, so other FAFSA corrections. So most information on the FAFSA should not be updated because it has to be accurate as of the day that the student originally signed their FAFSA form. So if a student completed their FAFSA and as of the day that they completed their FAFSA, all of that information was correct. And then 3 days later, they get their student aid report, which is that SAR report. And they said, oh, something's changed since those 3 days. I need to go in and make corrections. If it's not one of these corrections listed on this slide here, mailing address, email address, other contact information, or to add or remove schools, then we don't recommend that the student go in and make those corrections. So if the student got married in those 3 days, they should not make those corrections on the form. If a student's parent got married within those 3 days, if something's changed on that FAFSA form, they do not want to go in and make corrections because again, it's as of the day that they originally completed the FAFSA form. The other item is that students should not make changes to their income, assets, or household size information online or on the paper student aid report. These changes can increase the likelihood of the student being selected for verification. So just keep in mind, every time a student goes in and makes corrections to their FAFSA, it has to get reprocessed. And every time it's processed through the U.S. Department of Education, it increases their likelihood of it being selected for verification because it's running it through that process again. So if a student needs to make changes to their income, assets, or household income, we don't recommend that they log back into the FAFSA and make those corrections. We recommend that they contact the financial aid office at the institution that they're most likely to attend to work out how they can go ahead and update this information if they entered something incorrectly. The other item is if the update the student wants to make is not one of the allowed on the previous slide, but the student has some, or the family has special circumstances that can't be reported on the FAFSA. Special circumstances could be that possibly maybe in the last 6 months, one of the parents lost their job and it's been a substantial loss in income, or one of their parents was hospitalized and lost income there. That would be a warrant for a special circumstance, which needs to be handled at the financial aid office that they're likely to attend. So if that's something that has happened, which the previous year and currently right now is happening with COVID, a lot of parents were displaced with work, or there's been drastic changes in income, then they would definitely want to reach out to the financial aid office they're likely to attend. And that way they would have them complete what's called the special circumstance form so that the parents and the students can submit the difference between the 2020 income that was reported on their FAFSA compared to their current income and how that loss has impacted the family financially. Great. So let's go to the next slide. So how does a student correct an incorrect Social Security number? So if a student input the wrong Social Security number on their FAFSA, there's 3 methods that they can use to make the correction. The first one is the preferred method, which would be to create and submit a new FAFSA using the correct Social Security number. This is the preferred method because the Social Security number is going to be tied to that student, and that's the way the financial aid offices look up the student information for them. So that would be the preferred method there. The other item that they could do is a student can ask the financial aid office at one of the schools listed on the student aid report to change the Social Security number for them. That would require the student going into the financial aid office or contacting them, and basically showing proof that this is their Social Security number. So typically they'd have to bring in their Social Security number to prove it's them along with an ID. The least effective method is that students can change their Social Security number on the paper student aid report, sign it, and mail it. The only downside to this one is that it can take, again, 2 to 3 weeks to process because it's snail mail and has to go through that process. So again, we recommend that if a student put the incorrect social security number, that they just create a new FAFSA, go back in, re-answer all the questions again, but make sure that they're inputting the correct social security number. We have a question, so I'm gonna see here. So the question is, if a student is in the process of having a name change, should they wait until they have all the new documents or should submit the application with the current name? So great question. So the student should typically, basically right now is the information that they're inputting on the FAFSA has to be correct as of the date that they're completing the FAFSA. So if their name change hasn't gone through, they would want to put their former name. Once the name change does go through, then I'd recommend that they contact the financial aid office at the college or university that they're going to attend, and that way they can get that name change on there. And that way the financial aid office can do an official change on their FAFSA so that it's reported in the new student's name that's tied to their social security number. All right. So next is a verification. So if a student is selected for verification, just know it's not the end of the world. It's basically just a randomized process that the federal government requires colleges and universities to confirm or verify that the data reported by a student and their parents on the FAFSA is correct. So being selected for verification doesn't mean that the student did anything wrong. It doesn't mean that the parents submitted something wrong. It's not targeted verification. It's really just, again, a random process that the federal government has put in place just to ensure that the student and the parents are inputting the correct information on the FAFSA. So we always want to just make it seem like, make it really just tell students that, when they are selected for verification, the college or university is just going to ask for additional documents to verify, again, that that information is correct. So really, again, verification is a process that the colleges and universities use to confirm the information is correct. And again, it's a pretty simple process. Over the years, colleges and universities have done a great job to communicate the financial aid documents that are needed from students and parents. So it should be a pretty seamless process. And with the next few slides, you'll be able to help students and parents out if they have any questions on this. The thing to point out is that verification must be completed by each institution prior to a student receiving an award letter or financial aid disbursement. And if a student is selected for verification and they're not quite sure exactly which college or university that they're going to attend because they want to compare financial aid awards from, say, 2 or 3 universities, then they're going to need to complete verification at each of those institutions. So verification is specific to each institution because each institution has their own verification documents the student would need to submit. So if a student is selected for verification and they're thinking about going to U of A, NAU, and ASU or one of the Maricopa schools, but they want to get an award letter to see who's going to offer them the most financial aid to pay for college, then they would need to complete verification at each of those institutions. So a way to cut back on verification is by students using the IRS data retrieval tool. So if you participated in our webinars, FAFSA 101, FAFSA 201 with Diana Mateer, I'm sure she touched base on the data retrieval tool. And this basically is a tool when students and families are completing the FAFSA, it transfers over their IRS tax information automatically. And then that way, all of this information, tax information, is transferred automatically. It cuts down on errors. It also transfers the information so that students and parents aren't having to manually enter in their tax information. And it really just allows it to be a seamless process that cuts down on errors and also helps with cutting down on students being selected for verification. Because a lot of the verification is basically just confirming that this is a student's and parents' income that they're reporting. But if it's transferred directly from the IRS, it basically shows that this information is real time from the IRS. And that way they can go ahead and verify that information a lot faster than if a student did not use the IRS tool and manually input their information or their parents' information, which could then tend to, be human error by entering in the wrong number or the wrong information. So when you're helping students complete a FAFSA, if they're eligible to do the IRS data retrieval tool, highly encourage it. They do have the option to say no thanks or proceed to IRS. I would highly recommend 100% of the time, if they're eligible, have them link all of their tax information. That way it cuts down on, them being selected for verification or any errors. All right, so how do students know if they're selected for verification? So there's 3 ways. So once a student actually completes their FAFSA, it does not let them know right away you're selected for verification. It will let them know when the students receive their student aid report. Again, that usually comes a couple days after they actually complete and submit their FAFSA. It'll come by email first in a couple days, and then usually it takes about 7 to 10 days by mail. But on that student aid report, and which is that summary of all of the questions that the student answered, it will indicate if the student has been selected for verification or not. If they're selected for verification, it will say you are selected for verification. If they are not selected for verification, it will say you are not selected for verification. The other way that students can tell is upon admission to the college or university of their choice. The financial aid office or the college or university will reach out to that student via email or some type of notification letting them know, hey, you're selected for verification, and to complete verification at our institution, these are the items that we're requesting. The other way is by your student level data. So the commission has the FAFSA finish line data. If you are signed up for that data, it's basically student level FAFSA data, which you can upload a list of your high school seniors to this portal, and it will produce a list of all of those seniors who have completed a FAFSA. If it's incomplete, why, and it will also indicate if the students completed a FAFSA, if they are selected for verification. So you can always reach out to those students, send them an email, call them into your office, or group those students together and just say, hey, you are selected for verification. I'd recommend that you follow up with your school of your choice. That way you can get all your documents in. So again, number 1, not only is a student notified, the college is going to notify them. And then also, if you do have this access to the student level FAFSA data, the high schools can notify the students as well. If the student wants to receive, again, and compare financial aid awards, they're going to want to complete the verification at each of the institutions that they want a financial aid award. Is again, verification that's specific to each college or university. So all those colleges and universities are going to ask for the same information, but they're all going to have different forms with their own logo. So that's why the student would need to submit each of those verification items at each of the institutions. All right, so the verification process. So students should check with their college or university's financial aid office regarding what documents are needed to complete. So all of the financial aid offices, again, will reach out to the student. A lot of times the students don't necessarily check their emails or respond to phone calls, but they do reach out to students. So again, that FAFSA finish line data is important because it lets you, the high school, know if the student has been selected, and that way you can kind of help facilitate, that student to say, hey, keep a lookout for an email coming through from the university or the college, and that way they know exactly, what to expect there. Again, each school will have their own verification worksheets, but they'll all ask for similar documentation. The students will need to gather and complete and submit all the requested verification documents. Much of them are called verification worksheets. And then also they're going to need to gather their 2020 tax forms or statements of non-filing, if that's what that's requesting. Students should submit the verification documents on time. So the earlier, the better. With verification, sometimes students kind of drag the process on a little bit because they're not sure what to submit, or they're not sure exactly what verification is. So it's great to, just let students know, again, if they are selected, they're just asking for some documents to verify what you put on the FAFSA is correct. But they should also try to get those documents in as soon as possible. That way they complete this process and can get their award letters and their financial aid. And that way they make sure that they're adhering to any deadlines by any colleges or universities, so they're not missing out on any funding. Also, students should follow up with each college or university financial aid office. So, each college or university is going to have their own student portal. So once a student is admitted to that college or university, they'll have access to that student portal. And with each of the 3 state universities and with each of the community colleges here in Arizona, they're great at communicating all this information to students, having those worksheets available on that student portal. That way students can go ahead and download the information, complete it, and then resubmit it to the school. They also want to just make sure that they're keeping up with any emails or any texts from the schools or any snail mail that's coming through. And then the other thing that we recommend too is that once a student submits these documentations, that they keep receipts. So they keep a document of all of this information and these worksheets that they're submitting. That way they can just have it on file for themselves to go back to and say, I did submit this. I submitted it on this date. This is the worksheet. And that way they have all of the information ready at hand and know exactly what was submitted on what date. So for the 2020, so the FAFSA that's going to come up is the 2022-2023 FAFSA, what students will be doing, and they're going to be using the 2020 tax forms. Just a question that we got there. All right, so types of information requested. So when they're selected for verification, there are different types of information requested depending on what type of tax filer the parent or the student is. So if the parent filed taxes or the student filed taxes, they may ask for adjusted gross income. They may ask for U.S. income tax paid. They also may ask for any IRA disbursements or pensions. They also may ask for any deductions and payments. If a parent is not a non-tax filer, they may ask for income earned from work. So on the next slide, we'll go over the different amounts that are needed. If you make a certain amount, then you must file taxes. But if they make under that amount, which would be a non-tax filer, they're not required to, then they may ask for that income earned from work just to show how they're actually supporting their family. And then the other thing is for tax filers and non-tax filers, they may ask for just to confirm the number in the household. They may also ask to confirm the number in college. The other item they may ask for is possibly a statement of educational purpose. This statement is basically just a statement that the student would need to sign to say that if they are granted financial aid and they do accept it, then it would be used for educational purposes only. So they're pretty straightforward. Students should have this information on hand. Once they completed the FAFSA, they entered it. So all this information should be on their tax forms that they submitted, or they can just simply, get an income earned from work. So they can simply write a letter saying this is how we support our family. So on here, this next one that we have, so here is basically additional verification tips. So again, using that IRS data retrieval tool is very important because it'll reduce the likelihood of being selected for verification. Student and parent tax filer options. So they should, submit 2020 tax transcripts if they need to, sign copies of 2020 tax forms, again, or they can go back to if the student and parent did not use that IRS data retrieval tool on the first round and they manually entered in their tax information and say the student was selected for verification, the student and the parent can go back into the FAFSA and go ahead and use that data retrieval tool if they're eligible. And that way it'll import all that FAFSA information. So that way the student doesn't have to submit any tax transcripts or any tax information because it's automatically being verified from the IRS and transferred into their FAFSA. So that's another key reason why that IRS data retrieval tool is so important. So again, if students and parents can use it, definitely highly recommend it. The other item is that institutions may require copies of amended tax returns if the FAFSA had errors or the tax filing status was incorrect. So, students just want to keep that in mind if there were any errors when the parent initially submitted their taxes and they need to amend those, then they would need to go ahead and make corrections to their tax returns, have those amended, And that way they can update the information on their FAFSA. Independent students and parents who are not required to file taxes will be asked to request a verification of non-filing letter from the IRS and a written statement of income. On the next couple slides, we'll talk about how they can get that non-filing tax letter. And again, that written statement is just a handwritten statement letting them know how either that student is supporting themselves, that they're an independent student, or how the parents are supporting the family, even though they didn't have to file taxes. Okay, so I'm going to answer some questions here. So one of them is, did you say if selected for verification, they can go back and use the IRS tool? Yes. So if the student is selected for verification, and initially when they completed the FAFSA, if they did not use that IRS tool and they manually entered in their information, they can go back into the FAFSA. And if they're eligible to transfer in their tax information using the IRS tool, then they can go back in the FAFSA, transfer in their information using that data retrieval tool. And that way the student doesn't have to submit tax transcripts or tax forms to the financial aid office. They can just let them know that, hey, I use the IRS tool, and that way the financial aid office can go back and see that that information was verified on the FAFSA with the IRS. It's probably the quick and easiest way to do this. That way students and parents aren't having to gather all these tax transcript forms and send in all these papers. If they can use that data retrieval tool, like I said, it cuts down on time and it cuts down on, gathering all these documents and submitting them. You will have some families not eligible to use the IRS tool, which we went over in FAFSA 201 and 101. So if they're unable to use it and they did enter in their tax information manually, then they will need to go ahead and submit the actual, paper tax transcripts electronically or submit them in person to the financial aid office, whatever way works for them. All right, so how to request a tax transcript. And for those of you who are unsure what a tax transcript is, it's basically a summary of your taxes that you submitted. So basically, again, it has, all of the tax information that you submitted on your 1040 or whatever form that you used. But in order to request the tax transcripts, they can go to irs.gov. And there's a tool on there that says order a transcript tool. That's a mouthful there. But they can go ahead and click on that, and that way they can go ahead and order it online. They can also call the IRS and follow the prompts and order it by phone. They can also complete what's called a 4506T form. And this basically is a request to go ahead and have the tax transcript sent by mail or fax to the institution. So 3 ways to go ahead and, gather this information. I would say the easiest way is for the parent to go online to irs.gov, because that transcript tool is pretty easy to use. And that way they can go ahead and get that ordered and downloaded and then send it over to the school. Do you get the same, we have a question. So do you get the same info no matter how you request a tax transcript? Yes, it's the same tax transcript. So it's the same information. There's just 3 ways on how to request it. All right, so here is directly from the IRS. So if you have any parents who are thinking, oh, well, I made this amount, but I didn't file taxes, this here tells you what the threshold is. So it tells you if your filing status is single, and then at the end of 2020, you were a certain age, it will tell you, then file a tax return if your gross income was at least, and then it has the amount listed there. So if you have a family that is filing married, you have parents that are filing married and say that they're under 65, both spouses, and they made more than $24,800 a year, they're required to file. If they made less than that, then they're not required to file. So that's when that non-filing form would come into play there. So we'll send this out as a handout as well. That way you have it. Want to keep in mind that when you're helping students through this process, you don't have to be a tax expert. This is just a quick chart here. It's not something that you have to memorize. This is just something that we wanted to provide. That way, for yourself. And if you have any families that are, I made, $40,000 last year, but no, I didn't file. Then you can go back to this chart and say, well, you should have filed, you're required to file. Or if they made less than that, then you know that they weren't required to file. So that's when that non-filing form would come into play. All right, so how to request a non-filing letter. So again, if a student or parent falls within one of these categories here that they don't have to file, then a verification letter of non-filing can be required from the IRS, and it has to be dated on or after October 1st that will attest that the person did not file an IRS tax return for the tax year that they're requesting. Keep in mind, dependent students, so the majority of your high school seniors right now who don't have a job, or they may have a part-time job and they're not required to file, they do not have to submit a non-filing letter. This is primarily for parents who are basically saying that they're supporting families, their family, but they didn't file because they made under a certain threshold. So please in no way do not think that your high school seniors have to provide this letter because they didn't file because they make less than that. This is mainly for parents. To request a non-filing letter, they can go to this 4506T form, which we'll send out in the handouts. All they do is check box number 7 on that handout, submit it to the IRS, and that way they can get that non-filing letter. And it basically just attests that the IRS says that this person did not have to file for this year because they made under a certain amount, and then that's when it's submitted to the financial aid office. So that is the information there. Okay, so a statement of income. So this may come up in verification as well. So a school may ask for a statement of income, and the student may come to you and say, my parents have no idea what a statement of income is. No worries. So a statement of income is basically just a letter from the parent saying that these are the sources and amounts of earnings that they've had for their family. This is the income, and this is the resources that supported for the individual tax year. So it basically just has a quick statement that says, my family is supported by my work. I made $20,000 last year, and this is how we're supporting. I work at XYZ company, or I work part-time at whatever. This is just basically just a letter saying this is the income that they earned, that the parents sign and then go ahead and submit. So it's nothing to do with the IRS. It's just a statement of income there. So independent students and parents of dependent students who are not required to file taxes, but were not able to obtain the letter from the IRS after a good faith effort can submit a statement of income. So if you have any parents, let me go back to this slide here, who do not have a social security number, who do not have an EIN, keep in mind they can do a statement of income just to say this is how I support my family. Or individuals, again, without a social security number, sometimes with the IRS, if they don't have an employer identification number, they can't request that non-filing. So that's when this letter would come into play here, because it's basically a backup if they're unable to get that non-tax filing form. And please let me know if you have any questions on this section. The university financial aid offices do a really good job of communicating all of this information to the students as far as what they need. So they can definitely help out any of your students if they're having any trouble, or advise them on, how to write this statement of income, examples from other parents that have written it. So that definitely comes in handy. The other thing is following up with colleges and universities. So students want to make sure that they're staying in open communication with colleges and universities. So are there any other verification documents requested? So they always want to just double check. Sometimes a student can submit a verification document to the financial aid office, and then maybe a couple of days later, the financial aid office will send the student an email saying, oh, well, we need this additional document. So they just want to make sure that they're keeping up to date with that. They also want to just make sure that if the EFC has changed, So if a student is selected for verification and say their EFC has increased or decreased depending on the parent's income, they want to take note of that because that's going to change their financial aid awards. They also just want to make sure that once that verification is completed, that they do get an award letter. So they want to make sure that that award letter is in hand. That way they know exactly what type of aid that they're eligible for at that institution. And then again, students should contact the college or university's financial aid office with any verification questions that they may have. So again, if they're not sure how to fill out a form, if they're not sure exactly what is being asked of them, the financial aid offices are there to help, and they can help the students through this process. Obviously, a lot of the students come to counselors and ask, what's needed. Sometimes it's definitely a parent and you can help the student through the form. But if you are ever hesitant and not sure, reaching out to the financial aid office is the best way. That way they can help that student. All right, so what's a financial aid letter? So a financial aid letter lists the amount of financial aid that a student is being offered by a school. So this letter may include federal aid, it may include state or college-specific financial aid programs, as well as loans. Each school will send a financial aid letter after the student is accepted for admissions, has completed verification if they're selected for it, and has listed the school on their FAFSA. Some schools refer to the financial aid letter as different things. So you may hear it as a financial aid offer, you may hear it as a merit letter, an award letter, or financial aid package. Typically, I would say the schools in Arizona refer to it as a financial aid package or an award letter. Some schools out of state refer to a merit letter, but they're all the same thing, just different names. So if you ever have a student coming to you asking about any of these, they're all the same thing. It's just a summary of the awards that the student's eligible for at that institution. So within the award letter, I just put a little snapshot here. So this is actually an older one from the Maricopa Community College system for a student, but you can see this is what it looks like. The award letter is typically online in that student portal. A lot of times they mail out the award letters as well as a paper form in addition to it being online. And basically it just shows, this is the amount of federal Pell Grant that you're being offered for the full year. This is the amount of any subsidized or unsubsidized loans that you're being offered. It will have any other types of grants that they're being offered as well. And then the student would just need to go in if they're going to attend this institution and accept what awards that they want to have applied to their account. Typically the grants, because you don't have to pay those back, or something that the student doesn't have to accept. Typically the only awards that students have to accept are loans because initially obviously the student has to pay those back. So they want to make sure that the student recognizes that. And then there are also a couple other steps that the students would need to complete if they are going to take on a student loan. So factors within the award letter. Here's another example of a paper one. We'll have the student name, but factors as far as what the students are being offered, they take into consideration the income and all the information on the FAFSA application. And then they also take into consideration, the school's cost of attendance. So that cost of attendance consists of any tuition and fees, room and board, books and supplies, or any type of miscellaneous that would need to help that student through that academic year. It also takes into consideration, their academic level. Are they coming in as a freshman? Their dependency status, are they independent, dependent? It also takes into consideration, are they living on campus or off campus? So these are all items that play into that cost of attendance. So here you can see the awards offered. So they do break it up into fall and spring semester. And then they have the total amount for the full year. So you can see the student was being offered a President's Scholarship, $20,000 for the full year. So it's broken up 10,000 for spring, 10,000 for fall. They're also being awarded a portion of a Pell Grant, so 600 for each semester. They're also being awarded an Opportunity Grant. So you can see that amount there. And then towards the bottom, you can see that they're also being offered federal work study. And work study would be if a student wanted to work on campus. It's basically They can earn up to $1,500 a semester to work on campus. They get a paycheck. They can use it for, whatever they need to. It's basically a part-time job on campus. They also have the loans there. So the loans are breaking up into fall and spring semester. Again, the student would need to go in and accept which loans that they want to take on for that semester. And that way the financial aid office knows, okay, these are the awards that the student wants to take. And that way they can go ahead and process it for disbursement so that it pays the student's tuition. If there's anything left over, then a check will be sent out to that student to go ahead and use for any educational expenses that they need. So how are awards determined? So the EFC formula, which for the U.S. Department of Education used to refer to as the EFC, and now it's called the college index. So basically it's the same thing. It's just you may hear it as the index now, but it basically just considers more the income. So it considers, like I said, dependency status, family size, number of family members in college. So all of that information that the student provided on their FAFSA, it considers all of that within that EFC formula to see how much aid that student needs to assist them with paying for college, and then how much that family can contribute to that student's education. So again, the cost of attendance, COA, is basically going to be like your sticker price. So if you're buying a car, the cost of attendance is going to be maybe $30,000 for the year. So again, that includes tuition and fees, book supplies, room and board, transportation. So the students taking, bus, light rail, their own car, and then any personal expenses. And again, direct costs are paid directly to the college, such as tuition and fees, room and board. Once that is all covered, then the remaining balance, if any, would be sent out to the student. That way they can go ahead and use that for any additional books or educational supplies. All right, so now we're going to just go into a little detail here about the federal student loans. So student loans are money that a student can borrow and pay back with interest. They're not required to take out the entire amount. So if a student is being offered a $3,000 loan for the fall semester, and say they only need, 500 or 1,000 of that, we recommend that the student only take out 500 or 1,000 of that, and if they don't need that full $3,000. So it definitely helps cut back on, student loan debt. That also helps students with smart borrowing, so they're not borrowing more than they need. So it's a great way. That way, if a student, can take out less, we'd highly recommend that for them, because ultimately they're going to have to pay back whatever amount that they took out. Plus interest. So if a student chooses to borrow and start with federal loans, we recommend that they start with federal loans because it offers low interest rate and borrower-friendly repayments as opposed to doing a private student loan, which doesn't offer as borrower-friendly interest rates. Sometimes repayments are needed before even the student graduates from high school, or not high school, from college. So, if they are going to take out a loan, we recommend the federal loans are the best way just because of the low interest rates and having that, borrower-friendly repayment after. In order to take out a loan, a student must be enrolled in at least 6 credits. So typically that's usually 2 3-credit classes per term. So that's the minimum. If they're enrolled in only 1 3-credit course, they can't take out a loan. It has to be a minimum of 6 credits. Keep in mind, repayment begins shortly after the student graduates, or if they withdraw from the school or drop below that 6 credits. So as long as a student is actively enrolled in that college or university and taking 6 credits or more, their loans will not need to be paid. So different types of student loans. So we have the subsidized loan. So this would be students that are eligible have to demonstrate financial need based on the FAFSA. If borrowed, the federal government pays the interest while the student is in school. So as long as the student is in school, no interest is being gained on this loan. However, we highly recommend that students, if they're able to or their parents are able to pay, $20 or $50 a month just to go towards the principal of that loan, because no interest is being paid, that definitely helps. So when the student graduates, it's a lesser amount. The other thing is the students have to complete what's called an MPN if they're going to take out a student loan. And that's a master promissory note, basically meaning that they promise to pay back this loan. They also have to do what's called entrance counseling. And that basically just tells them exactly, what this loan is, that no interest is being gained on it. However, they highly encourage students to make maybe some small payment while they're in school if they can. It just basically is a quick educational guide on the loan itself. And then obviously they have to complete a FAFSA. The other one is an unsubsidized loan. So this one differs a little bit because it's not based on financial need. So anybody can take out an unsubsidized loan. So if you make, $1 million a year, you can submit the FAFSA, you still can take out an unsubsidized loan. Interest begins occurring once the loan is dispersed. So once that student actually has that loan dispersed on their account, interest starts gaining on it. So that's what makes it different than that subsidized loan that doesn't have interest gaining on it while the students in school. Again, an MPN, entrance counseling, and the FAFSA is required. The other one is Direct Plus loans. So these are available to parents of dependent undergraduate students. So this one here is subject to parent credit score. So it's basically a loan in the parent's name on behalf of the student. If a parent borrower is denied the Parent Plus loan, then the student can be eligible for an additional unsubsidized loan amount. So keep that in mind there. I typically do not recommend that students take out Direct Plus loans because it is, subject to credit check. It also is a loan that's going to be in the parent's name. So if you're able to do a subsidized or unsubsidized, I would say that's the way to go. However, if families are in a position that the student needs additional funding and the parents have, a credit score that's, eligible for this, then it can definitely help out the student. It just matters what's best for the family and the student. Also, parents must complete that master promissory note for those Direct Plus loans, saying that they, promise to pay the loan back and understand that they are taking out a loan in their name for their child's education. All right, so we have a question here. All right, so we got a question that says, that repayment of loans was 6 months after they left college. Yes, so it would basically be the repayment would be after they graduate college. Sometimes the repayment, depending on the loan, is anytime from 3 to 6 months. So they don't have to start paying the day after that they graduate from college. It typically is 6 months after, 3 to 6 months after. However, if a student is in a position where they need to defer that loan because they don't have a current job at the time, they can contact the federal U.S. Department of Education and see if that loan can be deferred out longer than those 3 to 6 months. So something to keep in mind there. And then they also have different repayment options as well. So students can set up repayment options, based on their income. They can, like I said, set up repayment options based on, interest. It definitely helps the students can pay a little while they're in school because then it helps cut down on those student loans once they graduate. But again, it's just all about smart borrowing, making sure that students aren't taking out more than what they need. And then obviously knowing that, this is a loan that you're going to have to pay back once you graduate. So taking that into account in their expenses, post-graduation, so that way they can make sure that they're paying these loans off in a timely manner. All right, so then we have Pell Grants. So my favorite type of award. So it's awarded to undergraduate students who display exceptional financial need based on the FAFSA. So if a student is pursuing an undergraduate degree, so that could be an associate's degree, that could be in a certificate degree, that could be a bachelor's degree, then they're eligible and they have exceptional financial need, they're eligible for a Pell Grant. Students can be eligible for a Pell Grant if they go full-time or part-time enrollment. The amounts change yearly. So the U.S. Department of Education usually ups the amount for Pell Grant every year, usually about $50 to $75, sometimes a little more. So the maximum federal Pell Grant award for the 2020 2020-2022 award year. So for this current award year right now, if students are in college and they are eligible for the full Pell Grant for the fall and spring semester, they would get $6,495. And basically the award year starts on July 1st all the way to June 30th. Keep in mind, while pursuing a first degree or certificate, students can receive Pell for no more than 12 semesters, which usually comes out to about 6 years. So if it takes a student longer than 6 years to complete their first undergraduate degree, and they've tapped out of all of their Pell eligibility, on that 7th year, they will not be eligible for Pell, even if they demonstrate exceptional financial need on the FAFSA, because it's gone over that time limit. Typically, students do complete their undergraduate degree if they come right out of high school, usually in about 4 to 5 years. Obviously, if they change majors, it can take a little bit longer, but they just want to be cognizant of the time to make sure it's not going over those 6 years, so they're not tapping out of this resource that is free money that applies to their education. Once you do get your undergraduate degree, it's good to note here that if they are pursuing a graduate degree, a master's program, they will not be eligible for the Pell Grant. It's only for students pursuing up to their first undergraduate degree, bachelor's degree. And if you have students who are starting at a community college first and say want to get their associate's degree, and then later plan to transfer to a university to get their bachelor's degree, they'd still be eligible for the Pell Grant as long as they display exceptional financial need for their associates and undergraduate. But again, once they get that undergraduate degree, then they're not eligible for Pell anymore. Federal work study. All right, so federal work study is a great opportunity. I'm going to go through this a little fast because I think we're kind of cutting up on time. It's a great opportunity that students, again, can work on campus. It's a part-time jobs on campus, so it has flexible hours, time management. The work is on campus typically. They do offer some off-campus work study as well. However, it's something that we always recommend when students completing the FAFSA that they say yes to federal work study. That way it's an option for them on their award letter if they would like to take advantage of that opportunity. The other thing is scholarships. So this can be a part of the award letter as well. So scholarships, again, are free money. They don't need to be repaid. They're offered by a number of organizations or institutions. And different types of scholarships can be merit scholarships. So that would be based on, students' GPA, test scores. Sometimes they also include like extracurricular activities, school, community involvement. They could also be athletic scholarships. Some scholarships are also for a personal background, like if students first generation or graduated from a certain high school. Scholarships are something that we highly recommend that they apply for. We want to keep in mind that if you ever have a student or parent who applied for a scholarship and they're being charged to apply for this, they should not go through with that. Scholarships should always be free. They should never have to pay to apply for a scholarship. All right, so I kind of went down a little fast there, but these are the resources that we have. We will definitely send all of these links out, all of the text forms, the tax forms that we have. I'll also send out a sample of the new FAFSA that's going to be released on October 1st. So you can see exactly what the screenshots look like on the online version and the mobile version as well. And that way you have a heads up to see what those, what it looks like, because it does have a little bit more of a modern feel to it. And then here is my contact information. I will also include it in the email that I'm sending out. So if you have any questions or anything that we went over, or you have any questions on any FAFSA materials or any resources that you need or questions that you're getting, feel free to reach out to me. Definitely happy to help. And then last but not least, definitely want to plug the Arizona FAFSA kickoff that we have. It's a statewide virtual kickoff that's going to happen at the end of this month on Tuesday, September 28th. It's going to be from 9:30 to 11:30 a.m. We're going to have tons of breakout sessions that go more in depth on this information. So hoping that everyone can attend that's on this webinar today. And we're also going to have some really cool prizes as well for counselors and educators. All right, let me see here. I'm going to go and answer some questions. So when do they start charging parents for the Parent Plus loan? So for the Parent Plus loan, typically they start charging parents once that money is dispersed. So that is another, downside there. But the Parent Plus loan, again, can be something that can be used for families if they, need to help with that expense gap there. Yes, anyone can attend the kickoff, so it's open to anyone. It's a virtual event. I will include the registration link in the email that I'm going to send out. That way you can just get that registration link to Zoom, register for it. We'd love to have, like I said, everyone attend. And that way we're going to have some really cool guest speakers, and the